A millionaire thought he had tried everything to help his daughter, until a janitor from Western Sydney did what no one else dared. Secrets long buried began to surface, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared Henry Lawson for what he saw next. This is a story of healing, quiet bravery, and the magic that exists in the most unexpected hands. Get ready for a tale that will stay with you long after it ends. Subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and let us know where in the world you're watching from, because this one's going straight to your heart. The Sydney harbour glittered like diamonds scattered across blue velvet as morning light bathed the glass and steel towers of Circular Quay. For most, the view from the 37th floor of the Lawson Biotech building was breathtaking, but Henry Lawson barely noticed it anymore. The panorama of the Opera House and Harbour Bridge had become merely the backdrop to endless meetings and mounting pressure. Henry straightened his Italian silk tie and checked his watch, a rare Swiss timepiece that cost more than what most people earned in a year. The boardroom behind him buzzed with the low murmur of executives preparing for the quarterly meeting. He should have been focused on the impending presentation, but his mind kept drifting to the email from Miss Carruthers, his daughter's third nanny in as many weeks. I regret to inform you that I can no longer continue in my position. Henry closed his eyes, trying to block out the reality that was unfolding in his personal life. Since Catherine's passing 2 months ago, 6-year-old Mia had retreated into a world of silence. The vibrant, chatty little girl who once filled their Vaucluse mansion with laughter now moved through rooms like a ghost, her small face blank, her eyes vacant. "Mr. Lawson," his assistant Vivian appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. "They're ready for you." He nodded, smoothing down his tailored suit jacket. "The Henderson figures? Updated and included in the presentation, and Dr. Wu confirmed the trial results will be ready by Thursday." "Good." Henry squared his shoulders, preparing to step into the role he knew well. The confident CEO, the visionary, the man who had built Lawson Biotech from the ground up into one of Australia's most prestigious pharmaceutical companies. But as he turned to enter the boardroom, his phone vibrated. The school, again. "Mr. Lawson, this is Principal Barnes from Harrington Preparatory. I'm afraid we need to discuss Mia's situation." Henry felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes. Mia had spent the morning huddled beneath her desk, headphones clamped over her ears, refusing to participate or even acknowledge the teacher's presence. "I understand," he said quietly, aware of the executives, waiting just meters away. "I'll make arrangements." After ending the call, he caught Vivian's questioning look. "Reschedule my afternoon. All of it." 2 hours later, Henry sat across from Principal Barnes, a woman whose compassionate expression did little to soften her words. "Mr. Lawson, while we sympathize with Mia's situation, we simply don't have the resources to provide the specialized attention she requires, perhaps after a period of homeschooling, combined with intensive therapy." Henry heard the words without really listening. Another door closing. Another professional admitting defeat when faced with his daughter's silence. The ride home was quiet, save for the soft classical music playing through the luxury car's sound system. In the rearview mirror, Henry could see Mia, staring out the window, her small fingers absently stroking the edge of her headphones, the ones Catherine had given her for her last birthday. She hadn't taken them off since the funeral. At home, the housekeeper greeted them with concerned eyes, but knew better than to ask questions. Henry led Mia to the kitchen, where he awkwardly prepared a sandwich that she would likely not eat. "Would you like to watch a film tonight?" he asked, keeping his tone light, pretending this was just another ordinary day. Mia didn't respond. She slipped off the kitchen stool and wandered toward the window, her reflection a small, solitary figure against the backdrop of Sydney's eastern suburbs, sprawling below their hillside home. That night, after tucking Mia into bed, an act that still felt foreign to his, hands more accustomed to signing contracts than pulling up blankets, Henry retreated to his study. The space had once been Catherine's favorite room, with its wall-to-wall bookshelves and comfortable reading nook overlooking the garden. Now it felt hollow, like everything else. He poured himself a glass of water. No alcohol, not anymore, not since he'd found himself relying on it too heavily in those first raw weeks, and opened his laptop. The list of potential nannies was growing shorter. The roster of recommended child psychologists had been exhausted. Even Dr. Brennan, the highly regarded grief counselor who charged $500 per session, had gently suggested that perhaps Mia needed more specialized help than she could provide. Henry rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of his helplessness. In the business world, he was known for solving impossible problems, for finding pathways where others saw only walls. But here, faced with his daughter's silence, he was utterly lost. His phone buzzed with a message from Vivian. "Board concerned about your absence. Henderson specifically asking about the Singapore expansion. Need response by morning." The real world, demanding his attention. World where he still had some semblance of control. With a heavy sigh, Henry closed the laptop without replying. Tomorrow, he would have to bring Mia to the office. There was no other option. Perhaps she could sit quietly in the corner of his private conference room while he attended the meetings that couldn't be postponed. As he passed Mia's room on the way to his own, he paused. The door was slightly ajar, and in the dim glow of the nightlight, he could see her small form curled tightly around a stuffed koala, Catherine's last gift to her. Her headphones were still in place, even in sleep. "I don't know how to reach you," he whispered, words he would never say if she were awake. "I don't know how to fix this." The painful irony wasn't lost on him. Henry Lawson, the man whose company developed treatments for rare diseases, who had built his fortune on healing others, couldn't heal his own daughter's broken heart. Edith Murray arrived at Lawson Biotech at precisely 4:30 a.m. each weekday, as she had for the past 11 years. The security guard at the loading dock, a younger man named Darren who always had a thermos of coffee beside him, nodded as she swiped her access card. "Morning, Edie. Looks like rain today." "Morning, love. Brought you a lamington from yesterday's CWA meeting." She placed the plastic-wrapped sweet on his desk, a ritual as familiar as the pre-dawn darkness. "You're a saint." Darren's smile revealed the gap between his front teeth. "Though you'd better not let Mrs. Kowalski catch you bringing outside food in here again." Edith waved away his concern with a worn hand. "That woman's been threatening to report me to management for a decade. I reckon I'm safe." She made her way to the janitor's room on the basement level, where she changed into her grey uniform, freshly pressed despite its age, and collected her cleaning cart. The wheels squeaked slightly as she guided it toward the service elevator, a sound that had become as much a part of her morning as her own breathing. At 54, Edith moved with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her face free of makeup, save for a touch of tinted lip balm. She wasn't particularly tall or short, fat or thin. She was simply as there, moving through the gleaming hallways of Lawson Biotech before. Most of its employees had even opened their eyes. The executive floor was always her first stop. The bigwigs liked coming into pristine offices, their desks clear of yesterday's coffee cups and waste paper baskets emptied of discarded proposals and printouts. As she dusted the enormous desk in Henry Lawson's corner office, Edith allowed herself a moment to gaze out at the harbor. The sky was just beginning to lighten, the water below still dark and mysterious. "Different worlds," she murmured to herself, thinking of her modest weatherboard house in Blacktown, where the morning light filtered through lace curtains her mother had crocheted decades ago. By 8:01 a.m., Edith had finished the executive floor and moved down to level 35, where the marketing department occupied an open-plan space, filled with sleek desks and large monitors. The early arrivers nodded politely as she emptied their bins, but most didn't really see her. She was part of the building's infrastructure, as essential and as overlooked as the air conditioning vents or the fire sprinklers overhead. At 10:30, she took her morning tea break in the small staff room tucked away near the service area. No one from upper management ever came here. It was the domain of the cleaners, the maintenance staff, the mailroom clerks, the invisible hands that kept the gleaming machinery of Lawson Biotech running smoothly. "Did you hear?" Josie from the mailroom was saying as Edith entered. "Himself is bringing his little girl in today. Apparently she's been kicked out of another fancy school." "Poor mite," said Gary, who maintained the building's electrical systems. "Lost her mum not long ago, didn't she?" Edith unwrapped her sandwich, cheese and pickle on wholemeal bread, and listened quietly. She remembered seeing Catherine Lawson a few times, a willowy woman with kind eyes who, unlike most executives, had actually noticed the cleaning staff. Once, during a late-night session when Edith was emptying bins on the executive floor, Mrs. Lawson had thanked her by name and offered her a cup of tea. "The child doesn't speak from what I've heard," Josie continued, lowering her voice as though sharing state secrets. "Not since the accident. Hasn't said a word." Edith felt a familiar pang in her chest, an old wound that never quite healed. She thought of the small photo tucked into her wallet, edges worn soft, from years of handling. After her break, Edith made her way to the company cafe on level 32. It was a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furnishings, reserved primarily for client meetings and executive lunches. She worked quickly, wiping down tables and sweeping the polished concrete floor, knowing the space would soon be filled with important people discussing important things. As she was finishing, the elevator doors opened and Henry Lawson stepped out, his tall figure impeccably dressed as always. Behind him, partially hidden, was a small girl with dark hair, oversized headphones covering her ears. Edith immediately busied herself with her cart, keeping her eyes down as the CEO guided his daughter to a table near the window. She recognized the look on the child's face, the vacant stare, the slight trembling of the lower lip, the way her small hands clutched at the headphones as if they were a lifeline. It was a look she knew intimately, though it had been many years since she'd seen it in the mirror. As Edith quietly wheeled her cart toward the service exit, she heard the little girl's breathing change, quickening, catching, the beginnings of panic. Mr. Lawson was speaking into his phone, his back half turned, unaware of the storm brewing in his daughter's small body. Without thinking, Edith reached into her pocket and removed the small object she always carried, a hand-sewn teddy bear, no larger than her palm, worn soft with age and smelling faintly of lavender, and the cedar box where she kept it at night. She placed it on the table nearest to the girl, then retreated behind a decorative column, watching as the child's wide eyes found the tiny bear. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the girl reached out one small hand and touched the bear's worn ear. The trembling stopped. 3 days had passed since the moment in the cafe. 3 days of Mia insisting on coming to work with her father, clutching the tiny bear in her pocket. Henry had noticed the change immediately, a slight shift in her posture, the occasional curious glance around instead of the vacant stare. It wasn't dramatic, but to a father desperate for any sign of improvement, it was like watching a wilted plant receive its first drops of water after a drought. "I don't understand it," he confided to Vivian, as they watched Mia sitting quietly by the window in his office, headphones in place but her eyes following the movement of a seagull outside. "She's still not speaking, but something's different." Vivian smiled. "Children are resilient, Mr. Lawson. Sometimes they just need time." But Henry knew it wasn't just time. Something had happened in that cafe, something he couldn't explain. He'd reviewed the security footage, a habit he'd developed. Since Catherine's passing, this need to document, to keep watch, but had seen nothing unusual. Just his daughter sitting alone for the brief moments he'd stepped away to take a call, and then the sudden appearance of the small teddy bear that she now refused to relinquish. He'd asked the cafe staff, but no one remembered seeing anyone approach Mia. The bear remained a mystery, as did the subtle change in his daughter. That afternoon, Henry had an unavoidable meeting with investors from Singapore. He arranged for Mia to sit in the company cafe, where the staff had been instructed to keep an eye on her from a distance, close enough for safety, but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. "I'll be back in an hour, sweetheart," he promised, kneeling beside her chair. "You can draw or listen. Study your music. Vivian will check on you every 15 minutes. Mia didn't respond, but she settled into the chair without protest, her small backpack, filled with coloring books and snacks, beside her. As Henry walked reluctantly toward the elevator, he didn't notice the grey uniformed figure pushing a cleaning cart into the cafe area. Edith had altered her schedule, ensuring she would be cleaning the cafe during the hour when she knew the little girl would be there. She kept her distance, methodically wiping down empty tables, emptying bins, restocking napkins, all while keeping the child in her peripheral vision. Mia sat very still, her headphones in place, small fingers occasionally touching the pocket where Edith knew the bear was hidden. After 20 minutes, Vivian appeared, smiled at the child, asked if she needed anything, and then departed when she received no response. When they were alone again, Edith moved closer, slowly wiping a table adjacent to Mia's. She could feel the child watching her, though whenever she glanced over, Mia would quickly look away. Finally, Edith sat down at the table she'd been cleaning, removed her lunch from her pocket, a simple apple and some crackers, and began to eat. She didn't look at Mia. She didn't speak. She simply existed in the same space, comfortable with the silence. After a few minutes, she pulled a small notebook from her uniform pocket and began to sketch with a stubby pencil. Edith was no artist, but she'd always found comfort in drawing simple things: birds, flowers, the view from her kitchen window. Today, she drew a small bear sitting on a cloud, looking down at the Sydney Opera House. She felt rather than saw Mia shift in her seat, moving slightly closer to see the drawing. Still, Edith didn't acknowledge her, continuing her simple sketch, adding little stars around the cloud. "Is that my bear?" The voice was so soft, so unexpected, that for a moment Edith thought she'd imagined it. She looked up slowly, careful not to appear startled. Mia had removed her headphones. They hung around her neck and her dark eyes were fixed on Edith's drawing. "I reckon it might be," Edith replied, keeping her voice gentle and matter-of-fact. "Does your bear like sitting on clouds?" Mia considered this, her brow furrowing slightly. "I don't know." "Well, this one does. He likes to watch the boats on the harbour." Edith added a few small sailboats to her drawing. Mia slid off her chair and moved to stand beside Edith, still maintaining a careful distance, but close enough to see the notebook properly. "What's his name?" Edith asked, not looking up from her drawing. There was a long pause, and Edith wondered if the brief moment of connection had passed. Then, barely audible, "Toby." Edith's pencil faltered, a small dot appearing where she hadn't intended one. She took a careful breath, steadying her hand. "Toby," she repeated softly. "That's a good name." They remained like that for several minutes, the janitor drawing, the child watching, until Vivian returned to check on Mia. The assistant's eyes widened at the sight of the little girl standing without her headphones, but she wisely said nothing about it. "Your father's meeting is running a bit long, Mia. Would you like a juice while you wait?" Mia retreated back to her chair without answering, the headphones quickly restored to their position over her ears. Edith stood, gathering her cleaning supplies. "I was just finishing up here, miss," she said to Vivian, her eyes downcast in the manner of someone accustomed to being invisible. Vivian nodded absently, her attention on Mia, who had turned back to the window, apparently lost once more in her private world. But as Edith wheeled her cart toward the service exit, she heard the lightest of footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Mia standing there, her small face solemn. "Thank you for Toby," the child whispered, so quietly that Edith had to lean down to hear her. Before Edith could respond, Mia hurried back to her chair. By the time Henry arrived, apologizing for the delay, his daughter was sitting exactly as he'd left her, silent, seemingly disconnected from her surroundings. That evening, as Edith prepared a simple dinner in her Blacktown home, her hands trembled slightly. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Toby. Of all the names in the world, the child had chosen that one. In her bedroom, in the top drawer of her bedside table, lay a photograph in a tarnished silver frame. She couldn't bring herself to look at it tonight. It would be too much after hearing his name today. Instead, she sat at her small kitchen table and began to sketch again. This time a bear named Toby having adventures across Sydney, riding a ferry, climbing the harbour bridge, peering into the tanks at the aquarium. Tomorrow she would find a way to leave the pages where a certain little girl might find them. The following week established a pattern. Henry brought Mia to work each day, finding it easier than the constant search for suitable childcare. The board members grumbled about the appropriateness of having a child in a corporate environment, but Henry silenced them with a single cold stare. His company, his rules. What Henry didn't know was that each day, while he attended meetings or conference calls, Mia would venture to the cafe during the late morning hours. And each day, as if by coincidence, Edith would be there quietly cleaning or taking her break. They never arranged these meetings, they didn't need to. It was as if some invisible thread connected them, pulling them to the same place at the same time. Their interactions began simply. Edith would draw, and Mia would watch. Sometimes Edith would leave a new drawing behind, always featuring the bear named Toby, and by the next day, Mia would have colored it in with the pencils she carried in her backpack. Gradually, their silent communion evolved. Edith began telling stories, not reading from books, but weaving tales from her imagination and memory. Stories about everyday objects that came to life when no one was looking. About the secret lives of the seagulls that wheeled outside the windows. About a teddy bear who traveled the world in a child's pocket, seeing wonders through button eyes. "The spoons in the cafe drawer have dancing competitions at night," Edith said one Day, keeping her voice low as she wiped down a nearby table. The teaspoons are best at the waltz, but the soup spoons do a ripper tango. Mia's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close to it. She had begun sitting closer to Edith during these encounters, though still maintaining a careful distance, as if testing the boundaries of this new, fragile connection. "How do they dance?" "Without legs?" she asked, her voice still soft but growing stronger with each conversation. Edith tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Well, now that's the clever bit. They use their handles like we use our arms, and they sort of shimmy about on their round parts. Makes an awful racket on the metal drawers, but the forks cheer them on something fierce." For the first time, Mia laughed. A small, rusty sound, as if her voice had forgotten how to express joy, but it was unmistakably a laugh. Edith turned away quickly, busying herself with her cleaning cart, not wanting the child to see how that simple sound had affected her. When she had composed herself, she continued her story, describing the grand championships held annually between the utensils of all the finest restaurants in Sydney. These moments became precious to them both. For Mia, they were an escape from the suffocating silence that had enveloped her since her mother's passing. For Edith, they were a chance to speak words that had been locked away for years. Neither of them spoke about these meetings to anyone else. Mia never mentioned Edith to her father, and Edith kept their encounters to herself, not even sharing them with her few friends among the maintenance staff. But people began to notice changes in Mia. The cafe staff observed that she had stopped wearing her headphones constantly. Vivian reported to Henry that his daughter had begun drawing again, colorful pictures that she would quickly hide when anyone approached. "She asked me for a juice yesterday," Vivian told Henry, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. She didn't just nod or point. She actually asked. Henry was cautiously optimistic. The child psychologist he'd recently consulted had suggested that Mia might be emerging from her selective mutism at her own pace. "These things can't be rushed," Dr. Levy had advised. "Create a safe environment, and she'll find her voice when she's ready." And so, believing that the office environment was somehow helping Mia, Henry continued bringing her to work. If he noticed that she seemed particularly eager to visit the cafe around 10:30 each morning, he attributed it to the routine that children often craved. One Tuesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after Mia had first encountered Edith, the routine was disrupted. An urgent call from the Singapore office required Henry's immediate attention, and he asked Vivian to take Mia to the cafe at the usual time. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he told his daughter, kissing the top of her head. "I'll join you as soon as I can." But when Vivian and Mia arrived at the cafe, it was unusually busy with executives hosting potential investors. The assistant hesitated in the doorway, surveying the crowded space. "Perhaps we should go to the break room on level 35 instead," she suggested, already turning to guide Mia back to the elevator. To her surprise, Mia pulled away, scanning the cafe with increasingly frantic eyes. "No," the child said, her voice rising slightly. "I need to be here." Vivian blinked in surprise. It was the most forceful statement she'd heard from Mia since before Catherine's passing. "Sweetheart, there's no room today. We'll come back tomorrow when it's quieter." Mia's eyes filled with tears, but she allowed herself to be led away. As the elevator doors closed, she cast one last desperate glance at the cafe, where a grey uniformed figure had just emerged from the service entrance, pushing a cleaning cart. That afternoon, as Edith was collecting trash from the executive offices, she heard someone call her name. Turning, she found Vivian approaching with a professional smile. "You're Edith, aren't you? From the cleaning staff?" Edith nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, miss. Is there a problem?" "Not at all. Mr. Lawson would like to see you in his office." Edith's heart sank. Had someone reported her interactions with Mia? Was she about to lose her job? At her age, with limited education and in the current economy, finding new employment would be nearly impossible. With a sense of dread, she followed Vivian to Henry Lawson's corner office, where the CEO was reviewing documents at his massive desk. "Thank you, Vivian. Please close the door." When they were alone, Henry gestured to a chair across from him. "Please, sit down." Edith perched on the edge of the seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "If this is about the cafe, sir, What about the cafe?" Henry interrupted, looking up with a puzzled expression. Edith hesitated, realizing she might have spoken too quickly. "Nothing, sir. Make sure it's cleaned properly each day. Henry studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. I've been reviewing the security footage from the past few weeks. He said slowly, I do this regularly for my daughter's safety. Edith's throat went dry. I understand, sir. And I've noticed something interesting. He tapped a few keys on his computer, then turned the screen so Edith could see it. The footage showed the cafe from 3 weeks ago, the day Mia had first spoken to her. There they were, Edith drawing and Mia watching, their lips moving in, conversation that the silent video couldn't capture. My daughter, Henry said, his voice tight with emotion, is talking to you. Edith sat perfectly still, her weathered hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The security footage played silently on Henry's computer screen, a visual record of connections that had seemed so private, so protected. I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson, she finally said, her eyes downcast. I didn't mean any harm. If you'd prefer I not interact with your daughter— No, Henry interrupted, his voice gentler than Edith had expected. You misunderstand me. I'm not angry. He paused, searching for the right word. I'm grateful. Edith looked up, surprise evident in her expression. Henry leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Do you understand what I'm seeing here? My daughter hasn't spoken to anyone since her mother died. Not to me, not to her teachers, not to any of the therapists or specialists I've consulted. His voice cracked slightly. But she's talking to you. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, afternoon sunlight glinted off the harbor waters, casting dancing reflections across the office walls. In the silence that followed Henry's words, these light patterns seemed to emphasize the fragility of the moment. I don't know why she chose me, sir, Edith said honestly. I recognized something in her, a kind of silence I understood. Henry studied her with new interest. What do you mean? Edith hesitated, unaccustomed to speaking about herself, especially to someone like Henry Lawson. The distance between their worlds suddenly seemed vast, his polished desk worth more than her car, his Italian shoes probably costing what she earned in a week. I lost someone too, she finally said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. My son. It was a long time ago. Henry's expression softened further. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Edith nodded in acknowledgement, but didn't elaborate. Some wounds, even old ones, were too tender for casual conversation. The bear, Henry said after a moment, the small teddy bear she carries everywhere now. That was from you. Yes, sir. It was my son's. I've kept it with me all these years. Henry leaned back in his chair, regarding Edith with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. What do you talk about? You and Mia. A small smile touched Edith's lips. Stories mostly. Nothing important, just silly things. Dancing spoons and adventures for her bear. Toby, Henry said. She calls it Toby. She whispered the name to me last night while I was tucking her in. It's the first thing she said directly to me in 2 months. The name hung in the air between them, and Edith felt that familiar twist in her heart. But she kept her expression neutral, years of practice coming to her aid. That's a good sign, sir. She's finding her way back. Henry stood and walked to the window, his back to Edith as he gazed out at the harbor. Ms. Murray, may I call you Edith? I've spent thousands of dollars on specialists. I've read every book on childhood trauma and grief. I've tried everything I could think of to help my daughter. He turned to face her. And you've done more for her in 3 weeks than all of that combined, just by telling her stories about dancing spoons. Edith shifted uncomfortably under his grateful gaze. Children need different things from different people, Mr. Lawson. You're her father. What she gets from you can't be replaced by anyone. Henry considered this, then nodded slowly. Nevertheless, I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to spend more time with Mia, in an official capacity? Edith blinked in surprise. I don't understand. I'd like to create a new position for you, something that would allow you to work with Mia regularly, while still respecting your other duties. Perhaps a kind of emotional support coordinator. Edith's first instinct was to refuse. She had deliberately constructed a life of routine and invisibility after Toby's death. The prospect of stepping into a more visible role, of making herself vulnerable to attachment, was terrifying. But then she thought of Mia's face when she laughed at the story of the dancing spoons, the way the child had begun to lean closer during their conversations, her trust building incrementally with each shared moment. I'm not qualified, Edith said hesitantly. I don't have any training in child psychology or education. You have something more valuable, Henry replied. You have her trust. Later that evening, as Edith prepared a simple dinner in her modest kitchen, she replayed the conversation with Henry in her mind. The job offer, with a substantial salary increase, had been unexpected and somewhat overwhelming. She had asked for time to consider it, and Henry had agreed, though his eagerness for her acceptance had been evident. As she stirred a pot of pumpkin soup, her eyes drifted to the small magnetic calendar on her refrigerator, where a faded photograph was held in place by a souvenir magnet from the Blue Mountains. A smiling boy with a gap between his front teeth gazed back at her, his school uniform slightly too big for his small frame. "What would you think, love?" she asked softly. "Your old mum stepping out of the shadows after all this time?" The photograph offered no answer, but as Edith ladled soup into a bowl, she felt a sense of clarity beginning to form. Perhaps this was why she'd kept going all these years, why she hadn't succumbed to grief or bitterness. Perhaps she'd been waiting without knowing it, for a little girl who needed the stories only she could tell. The following morning, Henry found a handwritten note on his desk, the paper slightly worn, the handwriting neat but unpretentious. "I'll help your daughter in any way I can. Edith Murray." By the end of the week, Lawson Biotech had a new position, Emotional Wellness Coordinator. The HR department had struggled with the job description, eventually settling on vague language about supporting the emotional well-being of executive family members and creating narrative-based coping strategies. For Henry, the title didn't matter. What mattered was that Mia had begun speaking more frequently, short sentences usually about Toby the bear, but words nonetheless. What mattered was the small smile that occasionally appeared when he mentioned that Edith would be spending time with her that day. Not everyone was pleased with the arrangement. Richard Henderson, the company's CFO and a board member, cornered Henry after a meeting, his disapproval evident. "A janitor, Henry? As some kind of emotional counselor for your daughter. The board is concerned about liability, not to mention the irregular nature of the appointment." Henry's response was cool and definitive. "The position has been created, Richard. The decision is made." "She has no qualifications," Henderson persisted. "No degree, no training. She's been cleaning toilets for a decade." "She has exactly the qualifications I'm looking for," Henry replied, his tone making it clear that the discussion was over. But as Henderson stalked away, Henry couldn't help but wonder if he'd acted too hastily. He knew almost nothing about Edith Murray beyond what HR had in her file. Widow, long-term employee, reliable worker, and the one personal detail she had shared, the loss of her son without any elaboration on the circumstances. Was he trusting his daughter's fragile emotional state to a stranger based solely on a few conversations caught on security footage? That afternoon he watched from the doorway of the small conference room that had been designated as Edith's workspace. The room had been transformed with comfortable chairs, a low table and art supplies. Edith sat cross-legged on a cushion on the floor, her grey uniform replaced by simple black trousers and a blue cardigan, her silver-streaked hair loose around her shoulders. Across from her, Mia was carefully arranging coloured pencils in a precise rainbow pattern. As Henry watched, his daughter looked up at Edith and asked, "Can Toby have a friend?" "What sort of friend were you thinking?" Edith asked, her voice warm and unhurried. "A koala. A girl koala," Mia replied, selecting a grey pencil. "She can show him the best trees for climbing." "That sounds perfect," Edith said, and began a new drawing on the paper between them. Henry stepped away quietly, not wanting to interrupt the moment. His doubts, while not entirely gone, had subsided significantly. Whatever Edith's background, whatever her qualifications on paper, she was reaching his daughter in ways no one else had managed. And for now, that was enough. The change in Mia became more noticeable as the weeks passed. She still had difficult days, moments when she retreated behind her headphones, when the world seemed too loud, too harsh, too full of reminders of her mother's absence. But these episodes grew shorter, less frequent. She began speaking to Vivian regularly, asking for specific snacks or books. She allowed Henry to read to her at bedtime, sometimes commenting on the stories or asking questions. Once she even giggled when he attempted different voices for the characters. The sound had made Henry's heart swell with a bittersweet mixture of joy and grief. Joy at this sign of his daughter's healing, grief that Catherine wasn't there to hear it. Edith had established a gentle routine with Mia. 3 afternoons a week they would meet in the story room, as Mia had dubbed it. Sometimes they drew together. Sometimes Edith told stories while Mia acted them out with Toby the bear and the growing collection of animal companions they had created together. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Edith knitting, a skill she had recently rediscovered, while Mia flipped through picture books. One Thursday afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows of Lawson Biotech, Mia asked a question that caught Edith by surprise. "Was Toby your little boy's name?" Edith's knitting needles stilled. She looked up to find Mia watching her intently, those dark eyes far too perceptive for a 6-year-old. "Yes," Edith said softly. "His name was Toby." Mia nodded, as if confirming something she had already suspected. "What happened to him?" Edith took a deep breath. In all the years since Toby's death, she had rarely spoken about him. A few necessary mentions to close friends, the occasional acknowledgement on his birthday or the anniversary of the fire, but never a conversation, never an opening of that carefully sealed vault of memory. But Mia was waiting, her small face solemn, her trust in Edith absolute. And somehow, Edith found herself answering. "There was a fire," she said simply. "At our house, when he was just a bit older than you are now, he didn't make it out." Mia absorbed this information with the directness that only children possess. "Were you sad for a long time?" "I was," Edith acknowledged. "Very sad. So sad that I stopped talking to people for a while, just like you did." Mia scooted closer, her shoulder now touching Edith's arm. "But you talk now." "I do. Because even though I'll always miss Toby, I learned that there are still good things in the world. Still stories to tell, still people who need me." Mia considered this, absently stroking the worn ear of the teddy bear in her lap. "Like me?" "Exactly like you," Edith said, gently tucking a strand of hair behind Mia's ear. They sat in silence for a few moments, the rain creating a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. Then Mia looked up at Edith with a small, determined smile. "I think my mum would like you." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, brought unexpected tears to Edith's eyes. "I think I would have liked her too," she managed to say. Later that evening, as Edith packed up her things to leave, she found Henry waiting in the hallway, outside the story room. "Mia told me about your son," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, I had no idea." Edith nodded, unsure what to say. It had been so long since she'd received condolences that she'd forgotten how to respond to them. "It was a long time ago," she finally said. 23 years next month." Henry's eyes widened slightly. "And you've carried his bear with you all this time?" "Every day," Edith confirmed. "Silly, I suppose." "No," Henry said firmly. "Not silly at all." He hesitated, then added, "Catherine's perfume. I still keep a bottle on my dresser. Sometimes I open it just to remember," Edith finished for him when he couldn't continue. "Yes, that's what we do, isn't it? Find ways to remember." The moment of shared understanding might have deepened, but they were interrupted by the arrival of Richard Henderson, his expression thunderous. "Henry, we need to talk now." He cast a dismissive glance at Edith. In private, Henry's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "My office, 5 minutes." To Edith, he added, "Thank you for today. I'll see you tomorrow." As Edith made her way to the elevator, she could feel Henderson's eyes on her back, cold and calculating. She'd noticed his frequent presence on the executive floor during her sessions with Mia, his thinly veiled observations of their activities. The man clearly disapproved of her new role, though she couldn't quite understand why it mattered to him. The following day brought clarity on that front. Edith arrived to find a formal letter waiting for her, requesting her presence at a meeting with Human Resources and the legal department. The meeting was as uncomfortable as she had anticipated. 3 people in expensive suits sat across from her at a conference table, their expressions professionally neutral, but their eyes assessing. "Ms. Murray," began a woman who had introduced herself as the head of HR, "we need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your new position and your interactions with Mia Lawson." Edith sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. "What concerns?" "You have no formal training in child psychology or education," said the company lawyer, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown. Your employment history prior to joining Lawson Biotech as a custodial staff member shows no relevant experience for the role you're now occupying. Mr. Lawson created this position specifically for me, Edith pointed out, keeping her voice steady. He's aware of my background. Yes, well, that's part of the issue, the HR director continued. The creation of this position circumvented normal hiring protocols. There was no job posting, no interview process, no consideration of other qualified candidates. And then there's the matter of liability, added the third person, whom Edith recognized as one of Henderson's assistants. Should anything happen to Mia Lawson while in your care, the company could face significant legal exposure. Edith felt a chill settle over her. Nothing is going to happen to Mia. We sit in a room and draw pictures, tell stories. I'm helping her find her voice again, without any professional qualifications to do so, the lawyer emphasized. The meeting continued in this vein for nearly an hour. By the end, though no explicit decision had been announced, the message was clear. Edith's position was under review, her time with Mia potentially limited. As she left the conference room, she found Henry waiting in the hallway, his expression dark. Henderson, he said, the name sounding like a curse. I just heard about the meeting. This is his doing. Why? Edith asked, genuinely puzzled. Why would he care about my spending time with Mia? Henry ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. It's not about you or Mia. It's about control, about reminding me that he has influence with the board. And, he hesitated, there are business considerations, a potential merger that Henderson is pushing for, one that would mean significant changes to the company. Changes I'm not sure I want. Edith absorbed this, understanding for the first time that her simple connection with a grieving child had somehow become entangled in corporate politics she could barely comprehend. What happens now? She asked. Henry's expression hardened with determination. Now I remind Henderson and the board exactly who founded this company and whose name is on the building. He placed a reassuring hand on Edith's shoulder. Don't worry, your job is safe. Your time with Mia continues as planned. But as Edith made her way home that evening, worry had already taken root. She had constructed a careful life in the decades since losing Toby. A quiet existence of routine and low expectations. Now she had allowed herself to care again, to matter to someone. And in doing so, she had inadvertently stepped into crosshairs she hadn't even known existed. That night, she removed the silver-framed photograph from her bedside drawer and placed it on her nightstand facing her pillow. What would you do, my boy? She whispered to the smiling face. Your mum's gone and gotten herself in a proper pickle, hasn't she? The photograph offered no answers, but as Edith drifted off to sleep, she found herself dreaming of dancing spoons and brave teddy bears, and of a little girl whose trust she could not bear to lose. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as Henry stood at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by 12 board members in tailored suits. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Sydney's skyline, but no one was admiring the view today. All eyes were fixed on Henry, who had called this emergency meeting with just 24 hours' notice. Thank you all for adjusting your schedules, he began, his voice carrying the controlled authority that had built Lawson Biotech from a startup into an industry leader. I understand. It's unusual to convene like this, but recent events have made it necessary. Richard Henderson sat halfway down the table, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed his annoyance. Next to him, Diane Wu, the company's chief scientific officer, glanced between the two men with barely concealed concern. I've become aware, Henry continued, of efforts to undermine decisions I've made regarding my daughter's care while she's here at Lawson Biotech. Henderson cleared his throat. Henry, if you're referring to the HR review of Ms. Murray's position, that's standard protocol for any new hire, especially one with such unconventional qualifications. Is it standard protocol to threaten someone with termination during what was supposed to be a routine review? Henry asked, his tone deceptively calm. No one threatened, Henderson began, but Henry cut him off. My assistant has provided me with a complete recording of yesterday's meeting. Henry's gaze swept the room. Would anyone like to hear it? The silence that followed was answer enough. I founded this company, Henry said, to develop treatments for diseases that traditional pharmaceutical companies deemed unprofitable. I've built it on the principle that sometimes the most effective solutions come from unexpected places. That's how we discovered LB-217, isn't it, Diane? Dr. Wu nodded. Our biggest breakthrough came from a compound that was initially rejected by 3 other labs. Exactly. Henry paced slowly around the table. And now, when I find that an unconventional approach is helping my daughter recover from the most traumatic experience of her young life, I'm told that corporate protocol is more important than her well-being. Henderson leaned forward. No one is questioning your commitment to your daughter, Henry, but there are legitimate concerns about liability, about qualifications, about the precedent this sets. The precedent of compassion, Henry interrupted, of recognizing human value beyond paper credentials. I'd be proud to set such a precedent. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Henderson, sensing the changing mood, adjusted his approach. We all sympathize with your situation, Henry, but you have to admit that your judgment may be clouded by personal considerations. Edith Murray was a janitor 3 weeks ago. Now she's been given a title and salary that exceed those of employees with advanced degrees and years of specialized experience. I'm well aware of who Edith Murray is, Henry replied. A woman who lost her child in a house fire 23 years ago. A woman who, despite that unimaginable tragedy, has shown up to work every day for 11 years without a single complaint. A woman who somehow understood exactly what my daughter needed when a parade of highly credentialed specialists failed. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. And if any of you had bothered to check, you'd know that before the fire that took her son, Edith Murray was a primary school teacher with a degree in early childhood education. This revelation rippled through the room. Henderson blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard. She never mentioned— No, she didn't, Henry agreed, because Edith doesn't define herself by titles or credentials. But I've done my research, which is more than can be said for whoever orchestrated yesterday's ambush. Henderson's jaw tightened. This isn't just about Murray, Henry, and you know it. It's about the Singapore merger. It's about the future direction of this company. It's about whether you're making decisions based on what's best for Lawson Biotech or what's best for your personal situation. A tense silence followed this declaration. Several board members looked down at the table, unwilling to meet Henry's eyes. I think we should be clear about what's happening here, Henry said finally, his voice quiet but firm. If anyone believes I'm not fit to lead this company, the company I built, the company that bears my name, then call for a vote of no confidence. Right now. He looked directly at Henderson. But understand this. My daughter's well-being is not negotiable. Edith Murray's position is not negotiable. And my authority as CEO to make these decisions is not negotiable. The challenge hung in the air. Henderson stared back, weighing his options, calculating his support among the board members. After a long moment, Diane Wu broke the silence. I think we're getting sidetracked. The Singapore merger deserves its own dedicated discussion, not to be conflated with staffing decisions. And frankly, if Edith Murray is helping Mia, that's good for everyone. A CEO who's not worried about his child is a more effective leader. Murmurs of agreement followed her pragmatic assessment. Henderson, recognizing defeat, nodded curtly. Fine, we'll table the merger discussion for now. But Henry, the board does have legitimate concerns about the company's direction. Those concerns won't disappear just because you've declared certain topics off limits. I've never been afraid of difficult discussions, Richard, Henry replied, but they'll be conducted with transparency and good faith, not through backdoor intimidation of my employees. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, some nodding respectfully to Henry, others avoiding his gaze. Diane Wu lingered behind. That was quite a speech, she said once they were alone. Henry sighed, suddenly looking tired. Did I just make a powerful enemy? Henderson's always been ambitious, Diane replied, but he's also practical. He won't move against you unless he's certain of winning. She hesitated, then added, How is Mia, really? Henry's expression softened. Better. Not fully healed. I don't know if she ever will be, completely. But she's speaking again. Engaging. Sometimes I even hear her laughing with Edith. Then you made the right call, Diane said simply. The rest is just corporate politics. Later that afternoon, Henry found Edith and Mia in the story room, surrounded by colorful paper creatures. Origami, he realized. Birds and flowers and what appeared to be a family of cats, all arranged in an elaborate scene on the low table. "Dad!" Mia looked up with a smile that still had the power to surprise him. "Edith is teaching me origami," Edith supplied gently, Japanese paper folding. "Look at this flower I made." Mia held up a slightly crumpled pink creation. "It's beautiful," Henry said, genuinely impressed. "A perfect lotus." Mia beamed, placing the flower carefully in the paper scene. "It's for the koi pond in Toby's garden." Henry caught Edith's eye over his daughter's head. "Edith, could I speak with you for a moment?" "Mia, would you be okay waiting here?" Mia nodded, already reaching for another sheet of colored paper. "I'm going to make a butterfly next." In the hallway, Edith's expression was cautious. "Is everything all right, Mr. Lawson?" "Yes," Henry assured her. "I wanted you to know that I've addressed the situation with the board. Your position is secure." Relief washed over Edith's face. "Thank you. I was worried that I might not be able to continue with Mia." "That was never going to happen," Henry said firmly. "But there is something else I wanted to discuss with you." He hesitated. "You never mentioned that you were a teacher." Edith's eyes dropped to the floor. "It was a lifetime ago. After Toby, I couldn't go back to a classroom full of children. It was too painful." "I understand," Henry said softly. "But your experience, combined with what you've accomplished with Mia, has given me an idea." He outlined his vision. A program within Lawson Biotech focused on emotional literacy through storytelling, initially for employees' children, but potentially expanding to partner with local hospitals and schools. "The Toby project," he finished, "with you as its director." Edith stared at him, speechless for a moment. "Mr. Lawson, I don't know what to say. It's been so long since I—" "You don't have to decide right now," Henry assured her. "Think about it. But I believe this could help many children, not just Mia." As he turned to rejoin his daughter, Edith called after him softly, "Mr. Lawson?" When he looked back, she said simply, "Thank you for believing in me." Henry smiled. "Thank you for helping my daughter find her voice." The weekend brought unexpected autumn sunshine to Sydney. On impulse, Henry decided to take Mia to Taronga Zoo, something they hadn't done since before Catherine's passing. To his surprise and delight, Mia embraced the idea enthusiastically, packing Toby the bear in her small backpack, so he can see the real animals. The day was filled with small wonders. Mia laughing at the antics of meerkats, her wide-eyed wonder at the majesty of giraffes, her serious conversation with Toby about whether platypuses were real animals or pretend ones. Each moment felt like a gift, a glimpse of the daughter Henry had feared he might never see again. As they sat eating ice cream cones, watching ferry boats crisscross the harbor, Mia suddenly asked, "Dad, does Edith have any pictures of her Toby?" The question caught Henry off guard. "I don't know, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" Mia licked a drip of vanilla from her hand before answering. "I was thinking about how you have lots of pictures of Mum all over our house, and how that helps us remember her." She looked up at him with solemn eyes. "But Edith doesn't have anyone to remember her Toby with." The simple observation, delivered with a child's directness, struck Henry forcefully. He'd never considered how isolated Edith might be in her grief, how she might have carried the weight of her memories alone for all these years. "That's a very thoughtful thing to notice," he told Mia. "Perhaps we could ask her if she'd like to share some memories of Toby with us sometime." Mia nodded, satisfied with this response, and returned her attention to her melting ice cream. But the seed of an idea had been planted in Henry's mind. Monday morning found him in his office earlier than usual, focused on his computer. Using the information from Edith's personnel file, he had been able to determine when and where the fire that claimed her son's life had occurred. News archives yielded a few brief articles about the tragedy in a small suburban neighborhood in Western Sydney, but little else. After his morning meetings, Henry made a phone call to a private investigator he had used during the early days of Lawson Biotech, when corporate espionage had been a genuine concern. "I need information on a house fire in Blacktown 2002, he explained. "Specifically, any surviving records, photographs or personal effects that might be available." The investigator promised to look into it, but cautioned that after so many years, tangible records might be scarce. Henry understood the challenge but felt compelled to try. Mia's observation had resonated with him. The importance of shared memory, of having physical touchstones to connect to those we've lost. Meanwhile, the Toby project was taking shape. Henry had allocated a modest budget and a dedicated space on the 30th floor, where Edith, still somewhat overwhelmed by her new role, was working with a small team to develop storytelling workshops and therapeutic activities for children experiencing various forms of trauma. "We'll start small," Henry had advised her. "Just a few children of employees, once or twice a week. As you become more comfortable, we can think about expanding." Edith had agreed, though he could see the mixture of excitement and trepidation in her eyes. After more than 2 decades of deliberately blending into the background, stepping into a leadership role was challenging, but her natural warmth with children and her intuitive understanding of their emotional needs were already evident in the program she was designing. 3 days later, as Henry was reviewing quarterly projections, his phone buzzed with a message from the investigator. "Found something. Coming to your office." An hour later, the investigator placed a small package on Henry's desk. "It wasn't easy," the man said. "Most physical records from that era haven't been digitized, and the original case files were destroyed in a storage facility flood in 2010. "But you found something," Henry prompted. "A community newspaper," the investigator explained. "They ran a feature on the local primary school the week before the fire. Edith Murray was teaching there, and her son was a student. The paper's archives included several photographs that never made it to print." Henry opened the package carefully. Inside was a plastic sleeve containing half a dozen photographs, slightly faded but clearly showing a classroom of children engaged in what appeared to be an art project. In one image, a young boy with a gap-toothed smile held up a colorful painting, his pride evident even across the decades. "That's Toby Murray," the investigator confirmed. "I compared the image to available records. The resemblance to his mother is striking." Henry studied the photograph. The boy had Edith's eyes, kind and expressive, and something about his confident stance suggested a child who had been raised with love and encouragement. "Thank you," Henry said, already imagining Edith's reaction to this unexpected gift. "This is exactly what I was hoping for." The investigator hesitated before leaving. "There's one more thing you should know. The fire wasn't entirely an accident." Henry looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Faulty wiring was the official cause, but my sources suggest it might have been more complicated. There was an investigation into whether the building code violations had been deliberately overlooked by inspectors taking bribes from the property management company. Was anyone ever charged?" The investigator shook his head. "The investigation stalled. Not enough evidence, or perhaps not enough political will to pursue it. Either way, it was never resolved." After the investigator left, Henry sat for a long time looking at the photographs, particularly the one of young Toby. Should he give these to Edith? Would they bring comfort, or would they reopen wounds that had taken decades to heal? And what about this new information about the fire? Was it something Edith already knew, or would it be yet another painful revelation? The question was still unresolved in his mind when Vivian knocked on his door. "Mr. Lawson, there's a situation with Mia." Henry was immediately alert. "What's happened?" She was in the story room with Edith, but when Edith stepped out briefly to get supplies, Mia disappeared. "Security is checking the building, but—" Henry was already on his feet. "Call my mobile if they find her. I'm going to check the floors myself." Heart racing, he hurried toward the elevator. This was the first real test of Mia's progress. How would she handle feeling abandoned even momentarily? Would she retreat back into silence, into the emotional fortress she had built after losing her mother? As the elevator descended, Henry's mind filled with possibilities, each more concerning than the last. Had Mia left the building somehow? Had she become disoriented and wandered into a restricted area? Was she hiding, afraid, or upset? On level 28, he found Edith searching frantically, her face pale with worry. "Mr. Lawson, I'm so sorry. I only left for a moment, and when I came back—" "It's not your fault," he assured her, though his own anxiety was mounting. "Let's split up. You take the west side of this floor, I'll take the east." They separated, calling Mia's name softly as they checked conference rooms, supply closets, break areas. The floor was mostly empty at this hour, with many employees out for late lunches. As Henry approached the old research library, a space rarely used now that most resources were digital, he heard a faint sound. Pushing open the heavy door, he found Mia sitting cross-legged on the floor between 2 tall bookshelves, Toby the bear clutched tightly to her chest. "Mia," he breathed, relief washing over him. "Sweetheart, we've been looking everywhere for you." She looked up, her eyes wide but not fearful. "I needed to be alone with Toby." For a little while, Henry knelt beside her, careful not to crowd her. "You scared us, disappearing like that. Edith is very worried." Mia's lower lip trembled slightly. "I didn't mean to make her scared. I needed to tell Toby something important." "What was so important that you had to come all the way here to tell him?" Henry asked gently. Mia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper, though they were alone in the room. "I remembered something about Mum, something I forgot, about how she used to sing to me when I couldn't sleep." Her small fingers stroked the bear's worn ear. "I was afraid if I didn't tell someone right away, I might forget again." The simple confession broke Henry's heart and healed it simultaneously. He pulled his daughter into a gentle embrace, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. "Oh, Mia," he murmured into her hair, "we never have to be afraid of forgetting Mum. She's part of us always, even when we can't remember every detail." Mia nodded against his shoulder. "That's what Edith says about her Toby, too." In that moment, Henry knew exactly what to do with the photographs in his office. They weren't just images from the past. They were bridges, connections between memory and present, between loss and healing. "Let's go find Edith," he said, standing and offering his hand to Mia. "And then I have something special to show both of you." 6 months had passed since the day Mia had disappeared into the research library. 6 months of steady, sometimes faltering, but always forward progress. Mia was now attending a new school 3 days a week, a progressive institution with smaller classes and a more flexible approach to education. She still had quiet days, still occasionally retreated behind her headphones, but these episodes were becoming rarer. The photograph of Toby that Henry had given to Edith now sat in a place of honor in the Toby Project room. Edith had wept when Henry presented it to her, her composure briefly crumbling as she traced her son's smile with trembling fingers. Later, when she had collected herself, she'd asked Henry how he had found it. His explanation about the community newspaper archive had seemed to satisfy her, and he had decided against sharing the investigators' suspicions about the fire. Some wounds were better left undisturbed. The Toby Project itself had exceeded even Henry's expectations. What had begun as a small initiative focused on storytelling as emotional therapy had expanded to include twice-weekly sessions for employees' children, monthly workshops open to the public, and a developing partnership with Sydney Children's Hospital. Edith had blossomed in her new role, her natural gift for connecting with children, complemented by the teaching skills she had rediscovered after decades of dormancy. On this particular Tuesday morning, Henry stood in the doorway of the project room, unnoticed by its occupants. The space had been transformed from a sterile conference room into a welcoming haven, walls painted in soft blues and greens, comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings, shelves filled with books and art supplies. In the center of the room, Edith sat cross-legged on a colorful rug surrounded by 6 children, including Mia. "And then," Edith was saying, her voice animated but gentle, the brave little koala realized that she didn't need to climb the tallest tree to prove her courage. Being brave enough to ask for help when she needed it, that was the greatest courage of all. The children listened with rapt attention, even the older ones who might normally consider themselves too grown up for such stories. There was something in Edith's storytelling that transcended age, a authenticity, a depth of feeling that made even simple tales resonate. As the story concluded, Edith guided the children to art stations where they could create their own interpretations of the brave koala's journey. Mia, now 7, moved confidently to a table with colored pencils, Toby the bear tucked safely in the pocket of her overalls. It was only as the children settled into their activities that Edith noticed Henry. She smiled and made her way to the door, her silver-streaked hair now styled in a becoming bob, her grey uniform long replaced by comfortable professional attire. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson," she said, though months had passed since he'd asked her to call him Henry. Some habits were hard to break. "The room looks wonderful," he replied, "and that was quite a story about the koala." Edith's eyes crinkled with pleasure. "The children helped create it, actually. We've been working on collaborative storytelling. Each child contributes an element, and together we shape it into something cohesive." Henry nodded, impressed yet again by her intuitive understanding of what children needed, not just to heal, but to thrive. "The board has approved the expansion proposal," he told her. Starting next quarter, we'll be able to offer the program to 3 local primary schools, with transportation provided for students who need it. The news clearly delighted Edith, though her response was characteristically modest. That's wonderful. The more children we can reach, the better. It was your presentation that convinced them, Henry said truthfully. Richard Henderson himself commented on how comprehensive and persuasive it was. This was perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. Henderson, once so opposed to Edith's role, had gradually become one of the Toby Project's strongest advocates. The turning point had come when his own nephew, struggling with anxiety after his parents' divorce, had participated in one of Edith's workshops. The change in the boy had been so dramatic that Henderson had approached Henry personally to acknowledge his error in judgment. The Singapore merger is proceeding as well, Henry continued, but with modifications that protect our core research priorities and the Toby Project's funding. Edith nodded, though corporate matters remained largely outside her sphere of interest. Her focus was always on the children, on the stories, on the healing work that had become her unexpected second act in life. "Will you join us for lunch?" she asked. "Mia has been talking all morning about showing you her new drawing." "I wouldn't miss it," Henry assured her. As he watched Edith return to the children, Henry reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The Toby Project had begun as a desperate attempt to help his daughter, but it had grown into something that was changing lives throughout the company and beyond. Employees reported less stress, better work-life balance, and a stronger sense of community. The board had noted improved retention rates and increased productivity. What had seemed like a distraction from Lawson Biotech's mission had instead reinforced and expanded it. Later, as Henry sat with Mia at lunch in the company cafe, the very place where she and Edith had first connected, his daughter showed him her latest creation, a detailed drawing of what appeared to be a family portrait. "This is you," she explained, pointing to a tall figure with a slightly too large head. "And this is me and this is Toby." The bear was depicted as if it were a real member of the family, standing upright between the human figures. "It's beautiful," Henry said sincerely. "Who's this?" He pointed to another figure slightly apart from the others. Mia's expression grew solemn. "That's Mum. She's watching over us from heaven. Edith says people we love never really leave us even when we can't see them anymore." Henry swallowed the sudden tightness in his throat. "Edith is very wise." "And this," Mia continued, pointing to a figure at the edge of the paper, "is Edith. I put her here because she's not exactly in our family, but she's not exactly not in our family either. She's in the in-between space." The description, so earnest and yet so perceptive, made Henry smile. "The in-between space," he repeated. "I think that's exactly right." That evening, after Mia had gone to bed, Henry found himself standing in Catherine's study, a room he had gradually stopped avoiding as the sharp edges of grief had softened over time. He picked up a framed photograph of his late wife, her smile radiant as she looked, not at the camera but slightly beyond it, as if glimpsing a future that only she could see. "You would approve, I think," he said softly to the image, "of the Toby Project, of Edith, of how Mia is healing." He traced the edge of the frame with his finger. "I'm trying to honor what we built together, while also finding a way forward." The photograph offered no response, of course, but as Henry replaced it on the shelf, he felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for so long. The in-between space, as Mia had called it, not moving on from loss, but moving forward with it, allowing it to shape but not define the future. As he prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a message from Edith. "Mia left Toby in the project room. I've brought him home with me for safekeeping. We'll return him tomorrow." Henry smiled at the message. The small bear had become such a fixture in their lives, a symbol of the unexpected connections that had helped them all heal. He typed a quick reply of thanks, then added, "Mia calls you part of our in-between space family. I think she's right, thank you for being there." 1 year after Edith had first placed the tiny teddy bear on the cafe table, Lawson Biotech was hosting an open house for the Toby Project. What had begun as one woman telling stories to a silent child had grown into a full-fledged program with dedicated staff, a growing body of research supporting its methods, and waiting lists for its workshops. The main conference center on the ground floor had been transformed for the occasion. Display boards showcased children's artwork, testimonials from parents and educators, and photographs of Toby Project activities. A professional-looking brochure outlined the program's philosophy: healing through storytelling, connection through creativity, hope through expression. Mia, dressed in her favorite yellow sundress, moved confidently through the crowd, explaining exhibits to visitors with the poise of someone much older than 7. Toby the bear peeked out from her small handbag, still her constant companion, though no longer her only voice. Henry, watching his daughter from across the room, felt a complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and lingering sadness. Catherine should have been here to see this, to see Mia flourishing, to witness the unexpected legacy that had grown from their shared loss. "She's doing brilliantly," said a voice beside him. Edith had approached quietly, a skill she retained despite her elevation from invisible janitor to respected program director. "She is," Henry agreed. "Sometimes I can hardly believe the difference a year has made." They stood in comfortable silence, observing the gathering. Board members mingled with employees and their families. Richard Henderson was deep in conversation with a representative from the Department of Education. Diane Wu was explaining the neurological benefits of creative expression to a group of interested parents. "I never imagined this," Edith said softly. "When I first saw Mia in that cafe, trembling behind her headphones, I just wanted to offer a moment of comfort. I never thought it would lead to all this." Henry turned to look at her properly. The past year had changed Edith as well. She stood straighter, spoke with more confidence. The weight of solitary grief that had seemed to press on her shoulders had lightened, though not disappeared entirely. "Did I ever tell you why I created the Toby project?" he asked. Edith shook her head. "It wasn't just for Mia, though that was certainly part of it," Henry explained. "It was because I recognized in you something I'd lost sight of myself, the understanding that healing doesn't come from credentials or treatment protocols or corporate strategies. It comes from human connection, from being seen." Edith's eyes misted slightly, but her smile remained steady. "The children taught me that long ago. I'd just forgotten for a while." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a small delegation from Sydney Children's Hospital, doctors and administrators interested in implementing the Toby Project's methods in their own facilities. "Ms. Murray," said the lead physician, extending his hand, "your reputation precedes you. We're very interested in learning how your storytelling approach might benefit our long-term patients." As Edith led the group toward one of the display areas, explaining the program's core principles, Henry felt a tug on his sleeve. Mia had appeared at his side, slightly out of breath from her duties as unofficial tour guide. "Dad," she whispered urgently, "I have an important question." Henry knelt to her level, giving her his full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" Mia glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard, then leaned close to her father's ear. "Do you think Edith would want to come live with us? Not just for visits, but forever?" The question caught Henry completely off guard. "Mia, that's a very big question. Why do you ask?" His daughter's expression was earnest. "Because she's sad in her house all alone. She told me stories have more magic when they're shared. So, shouldn't homes be the same way?" Henry considered his response carefully. The past year had indeed brought Edith into their lives in increasingly significant ways. Sunday dinners, occasional weekends at their home when work required late nights, even a memorable holiday to the Blue Mountains where Mia had insisted Edith have the room with the best view. But living together, that was a leap he hadn't contemplated. "Edith might like her independence," he said gently, "and changes like that need to be discussed very carefully." Mia nodded, processing this adult logic. "But you could discuss it with her, couldn't you? The worst she could say is no." The simple wisdom in his daughter's words made Henry smile. "When did you get so smart?" "Edith says I've always been smart. I just needed to find my voice again." Mia looked across the room to where Edith was gesturing animatedly as she explained a particular aspect of the program. "And she helped me find it." Later that evening, after the open house had concluded and Mia had fallen asleep, Henry and Edith sat on the terrace of the Lawson home, watching the distant lights of Sydney Harbour. The success of the event had left them both exhilarated but exhausted. "To the Toby Project," Henry said, raising his glass of sparkling water in a toast. "To new beginnings," Edith countered, touching her glass to his. The night was warm, the air scented with jasmine from the garden below. In comfortable silence, they contemplated the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey neither could have imagined a year ago. Mia asked me an interesting question. Today, Henry said finally, deciding that his daughter's directness was perhaps the best approach. Oh, she wanted to know if you might consider coming to live with us. Edith's eyes widened in surprise. Live with you? Here? It caught me off guard too, Henry admitted with a small laugh. But when Mia gets an idea in her head, she's persistent, Edith finished for him, a fond smile, playing at her lips, like her father. They looked at each other then, really looked, in a way they hadn't allowed themselves to do before. Henry saw not just the woman who had saved his daughter from silence, but a person of remarkable strength and compassion, who had transformed her own tragedy into a gift for others. And in his eyes, Edith saw not just the powerful CEO or the grieving widower, but a man learning to balance vulnerability and strength, past and future. I'm not suggesting we should jump into anything, Henry clarified quickly, but I think what Mia was really trying to say, in her 7-year-old way, is that you've become important to us, to both of us. Edith's expression softened. And you've both become important to me, more than I ever expected, more than I thought possible after Toby. So perhaps, Henry suggested carefully, we could explore what that might mean, not necessarily living together right away, but not being quite so separate either. The in-between space, Edith said with a small smile, referencing Mia's description. Exactly. As they continued talking about possibilities, about caution, about the complex geography of grief and healing, and new connections, the lights of Sydney twinkled below them like earthbound stars. Neither made any grand declarations or definitive plans. Those would come later, after more conversations, more careful steps forward. But something had shifted. A door had opened that neither had fully acknowledged before. Whatever lay beyond it would be approached with the same patience and care that had characterized their journey so far. One story, one shared moment, one brave step at a time. 3 weeks later, the Lawson living room was filled with laughter as Edith led Mia and several children from the Toby project in an impromptu puppet show. Using socks with button eyes and yarn hair, they enacted the continuing adventures of Toby the bear and his friends. Adventures that now included a character suspiciously similar to Catherine, watching over the others from a star in the sky. Henry, observing from the doorway, felt the familiar bittersweet ache that always accompanied these moments. Joy at the present, sadness for what was lost. But increasingly the joy was winning. On the mantelpiece, 2 photographs now stood side by side. Catherine in her favorite garden spot, smiling into sunlight, and young Toby Murray with his gap-toothed grin and paint-smudged hands. Not competing memories, but complementary ones. Not replacements, but expansions. Dad, Mia called, noticing him watching. We need someone to play the wise old wombat. Edith says you'd be perfect. Henry laughed, stepping into the circle. A wise old wombat? I'm not sure whether to be flattered or insulted. Wombats are very respected in the animal kingdom, Edith informed him with mock seriousness. Sturdy, dependable, and with excellent burrowing skills. Well, when you put it that way. As he joined the makeshift performance, accepting the brown sock puppet Mia handed him with solemn ceremony, Henry caught Edith's eye over his daughter's head. The look that passed between them held a wealth of unspoken understanding, of shared purpose, of cautious hope, of the healing power of new connections forged in the aftermath of loss. In a world obsessed with titles, metrics, and appearances, a little girl and a woman with well-earned wisdom had reminded everyone what truly mattered: connection, grace, and the healing power of being seen. Sometimes the person you need most isn't the one with the highest degree, but the one who knows what it feels like to hurt and still chooses to stay. Because when stories are shared from the heart, they don't just entertain, they save lives.